Your wife filed first, Mr. Lancaster. The words landed harder than the envelope itself. For one suspended second, nobody inside Damian Lancaster's glass office moved. Outside, Chicago glittered beneath a winter dusk, all steel, ice, and expensive silence. Inside, Brielle Vaughn stood beside the window with champagne against her red mouth. She had been laughing moments earlier. Damian had been telling her that Sophie would never leave. Not now. Not pregnant. Not without him. Then the courier crossed the white carpet and placed a cream envelope on Damian's desk. The paper made almost no sound. Somehow, it silenced the room. Stay with me, because the man who believed he owned everything was about to discover the one thing money had never purchased, his wife's surrender. Damian glanced at the envelope, then at the courier. What is this? Service of process, sir. Brielle's smile thinned. Damian leaned back in his Italian leather chair, amused, almost insulted by the interruption. His cufflinks flashed beneath the recessed lights. Sophie sent this? The courier said nothing. He did not need to. Damian broke the seal with one impatient finger. The first page carried Sophie Lancaster's name in clean black type. Petitioner. Damian's expression did not change immediately. Men like him were trained to let shock die behind their eyes. But Brielle saw his thumb stop against the page. She saw the color leave his face. Beneath the petition for dissolution of marriage was notice of an emergency financial hearing. A separate temporary preservation order covered specified company emails, private transfers, executive devices, and accounts connected to the disputed transactions at Lancaster Development. The champagne bubble popped softly in Brielle's glass. It sounded like a warning shot. She cannot do this, Damian said. His voice remained calm, but the tendons in his hand had tightened. Brielle stepped closer, her perfume cutting through the office's cold recycled air. Maybe it is only a bluff. Damian turned the next page. A photograph had been clipped behind the legal notice. It showed a wire transfer from Lancaster Development into a shell company registered under Brielle's middle name. $2.4 million. Brielle lowered her glass. You said nobody could trace that. Damian looked at her then, and for the first time that evening, desire vanished from his face. Calculation replaced it. Suspicion followed. He seized his phone and called Sophie. Once, twice, 3 times. Each call fell into voicemail. Across the city, Sophie sat in Rachel Monroe's quiet office with one hand resting over her unborn daughter. Her honey blonde hair was tied low, and her blue-gray eyes were dry. No mascara streaks. No trembling apology. Only the steady heartbeat of a woman who had finally stopped asking permission to survive. Damian's fourth call lit the table between her and Rachel. Sophie watched his name glow until the screen went dark. Rachel studied her. Are you ready for what comes next? Sophie looked down at the copy of the petition. Damian had spent 6 years teaching her that silence meant obedience. He had never imagined silence could become strategy. Yes, she whispered. Then she slid a second cream envelope toward Rachel. This one was addressed to Damian's board of directors, and inside it waited the signature that could destroy him completely. 48 hours earlier, Sophie Lancaster had been sitting alone beneath the blue-white glow of an ultrasound monitor, listening to her daughter's heartbeat fill the room like rain against glass. Fast, steady, alive. The sound should have comforted her. Instead, it made the empty chair beside the examination table feel even colder. Your husband still couldn't make it? Dr. Elaine Porter asked gently. Sophie forced a smile. Emergency meeting. It was the 4th emergency meeting in 6 weeks. The 4th appointment Damian had promised not to miss. The 4th time Sophie had watched other husbands lean toward the monitor while she held her own hand. Dr. Porter moved the ultrasound wand carefully across Sophie's stomach. At 31 weeks pregnant, every movement had become deliberate. Her lower back ached. Her ankles were swollen. Sleep came in fragments. But the baby was beautiful. 10 tiny fingers. A strong spine. A face turned slightly toward the shadows. There she is, the doctor whispered. Still growing exactly as she should. Sophie stared at the screen. For one fragile second, the world became small enough to survive. Then the blood pressure cuff tightened around her arm. Dr. Porter's expression changed. Your pressure is elevated again. I'm fine. That is what frightened people say when they are trying not to become a burden. The words struck deeper than Sophie expected. She looked away. Outside the examination room, a cart rattled down the hallway. Somewhere, a newborn began to cry. The sound was thin and furious, a protest against being brought into a world that had not asked permission. "You need less stress," Dr. Porter said. "Not next month. Now." Sophie nodded, though they both knew stress lived in her house, slept beside her, and wore a wedding ring. At the reception desk, she opened the banking app to pay the remaining balance. A notification appeared. Transfer completed. $480,000. Sophie stopped breathing. The money had come from the account she and Damian used for long-term family investments. The destination was listed as BV Strategic Holdings. BV, Brielle Vaughn. The initials seemed to pulse on the screen. Sophie clicked the transaction, but most details were restricted. Damian had changed the account permissions 3 days earlier. Behind her, a nurse called another patient's name. Shoes crossed polished tile. Phones rang. Normal life continued while Sophie's marriage split open in silence. Then her phone vibrated again. A message from Damian. She opened it before she could stop herself. "Once she signs after the baby comes, the rest will be easy. Keep her calm until then." Sophie read the words twice. Then a third time. A second message appeared almost immediately. "Wrong chat. Ignore that." Her fingers turned cold. Damian called. She watched his name flash across the screen, but did not answer. A voicemail arrived seconds later. "Sophie, sweetheart, that message was about a client. Do not overthink it. Pregnancy hormones are making you anxious again." Again. The word was soft. Practiced. Cruel. Sophie placed one hand over her daughter. The baby kicked hard beneath her palm. Not fear. Not this time. A warning. Sophie took a screenshot of the message, forwarded it to a private email account Damian did not know existed, and deleted nothing. Then she walked out of the clinic without calling him back. In the parking garage, sunlight cut through the concrete in narrow silver bars. Sophie stood beside her car, breathing slowly, while the truth arranged itself around her. The transfer, the message, the missing appointments, the account restrictions. Damian was not preparing to leave her. He was preparing to erase her. And for the first time since marrying him, Sophie understood that survival would begin with pretending she knew nothing. 7 years earlier, before the glass towers and magazine covers, Damian Lancaster had owned little more than a borrowed suit, a failing company, and a talent for making desperation sound like ambition. Sophie had believed in him anyway. She was 23 then, fresh from a financial analytics firm where senior partners trusted her with numbers worth more than most people's homes. Her honey blonde hair was longer, her blue-gray eyes brighter, and she still thought love meant building something together. Damian's first office was above a closed furniture store on the south side of Chicago. The radiator coughed rust-colored water. The windows shook whenever the train passed. But every night, Sophie climbed those narrow stairs carrying coffee, spreadsheets, and hope. Lancaster Development was 3 weeks from collapse when she found the mistake. A commercial property Damian wanted to buy had been valued using outdated tax projections. Everyone else saw a condemned warehouse near the river. Sophie saw rezoning permits, a transit expansion, a neighborhood about to change. She stayed awake for 36 hours, rebuilding the financial model line by line. At dawn, she placed the finished report in front of Damian. "If you structure the purchase this way," she said, tapping the page, "you can own it before the city announcement." Damian stared at the numbers, then at her. "This could save us." Us. She remembered that word more clearly than the proposal that came 6 months later. The bank still refused the loan. Damian had no collateral, no family wealth, no second chance waiting behind him. Sophie did. Her mother had left her a modest inheritance and a small townhouse in Wisconsin. It was the last piece of home she had. Damian never asked her to risk it. He only sat at the kitchen table with his face in his hands and whispered, "I guess some dreams are meant for other men." The next morning, Sophie signed the property as security. Damian kissed her forehead and promised he would spend the rest of his life making sure she never regretted it. The warehouse sold 4 years later for $28 million. By then, the leaking office was gone. So were the cheap suits and trembling apologies. Damian stood beneath ballroom lights, accepting an award for visionary leadership, while Sophie watched from a table near the back. "I built this company from nothing," he told the crowd. The applause rose like thunder. Sophie clapped too. That night, she asked why he had not mentioned her. Damian loosened his tie and smiled as if she were being childish. Why does credit matter between husband and wife? The sentence became a lock. Whenever she asked about shares, he reminded her they were married. Whenever she suggested returning to work, he said the company needed her behind the scenes. Whenever an article called him a self-made millionaire, he kissed her and said she knew the truth. Slowly, her name disappeared. First from the investor presentations, then from the internal histories, finally, from the original acquisition files. But Damian had forgotten something. On the night Sophie pledged her mother's property, the bank required a signed and notarized founder's agreement attached to the original loan package. It named her as the originating financial architect and guaranteed her an ownership interest if the company crossed a specified valuation. Damian later claimed the document had been replaced. Sophie had believed him, until 2 months before her pregnancy, when she found her original counterpart sealed inside her mother's old cedar chest. The ink was faded, the signatures were not, and beneath Damian Lancaster's name waited the one thing he had spent 7 years trying to erase. Hers. Damian came home at 11:47 that night, carrying the scent of cedar cologne and someone else's perfume. Sophie was waiting in the living room with the lights dimmed, one hand resting beneath her swollen belly, the other holding a cup of tea she had not touched. He loosened his tie as he walked in. "You're still awake?" "I couldn't sleep." Damian barely looked at her. "You need to stop working yourself up. It's not good for the baby." The concern sounded perfect. That was what made it frightening. Sophie watched him disappear upstairs, listened to the shower turn on, then waited until the water had been running for 3 full minutes. His briefcase sat beside the entry table. Locked. It had never been locked before. Her pulse began to climb. Stay with her, because sometimes betrayal does not arrive screaming. Sometimes it waits behind a password and trusts that love has made you too polite to look. Sophie carried Damian's laptop into the kitchen and opened it beneath the yellow light above the stove. The password was still their anniversary, June 12th, the date he had forgotten the year before. She searched his recent files first. Nothing. Then deleted items. Nothing. Then a folder buried inside a directory labeled municipal permits. Divestiture plan. The words stared back at her. Inside were drafts prepared by Damian's attorneys. Asset transfers. Property assignments. Internal memos. A proposed divorce strategy dated 3 months earlier. Before the transfer to Brielle. Before the missed appointments. Before Damian had begun telling friends Sophie was emotionally fragile. Sophie opened the first legal memorandum. The language was clinical. Respondent has no material role in company formation. Financially dependent spouse. Documented anxiety during pregnancy. Potential concerns regarding postpartum stability. Her breathing stopped. They were not simply planning to leave her with less. They were preparing to make her look unfit. A draft affidavit described Sophie as forgetful, irrational, and increasingly suspicious. Each accusation was built from ordinary moments: a canceled dinner, an argument over Damian's travel schedule, a night she cried after learning the baby might need additional monitoring. Pain had been converted into evidence. Love had been converted into a case file. Then Sophie found the scanned signature. Her signature. It appeared beneath a transfer agreement surrendering any historical interest in Lancaster development. She touched the screen. The loop in the S was wrong. Too smooth. Too careful. Sophie had signed her name thousands of times. She knew where her hand hesitated, where the final stroke rose too sharply. This was not hers. A soft sound came from the hallway. The shower had stopped. Sophie copied the folder onto a flash drive, closed every window, and returned the laptop to the exact angle she had found it. Damian entered the kitchen moments later, hair damp, shirt unbuttoned at the collar. "What are you doing?" Sophie lifted the tea. Couldn't sleep. He studied her for 1 second too long. Then he smiled. "Come to bed." She followed him upstairs. At 2:13 a.m., while Damian slept beside her, Sophie opened her private email from her phone and found one more message inside the copied files. It was from Brielle. "Once the public believes she is unstable, no one will question the transfer." Sophie stared at the sentence until the screen blurred. Then she saved it in 3 separate locations. By sunrise, the flash drive was hidden inside the torn lining of an old maternity coat Damian had once called ugly. At 8:05, Sophie called Rachel Monroe. Rachel answered on the second ring. "Sophie, I need a lawyer." There was a pause. Then Rachel's voice sharpened. "What happened?" Sophie looked toward the staircase where Damian was coming down, smiling into his phone. He forged my name. Rachel did not gasp. She did not offer comfort. She said only, do not confront him. Bring me everything. Sophie ended the call before Damian entered the room. He kissed her forehead. She smiled. And hidden inside a coat he would never notice was the first piece of the life he had tried to steal. Rachel did not open the flash drive on her office computer. She placed it in an evidence bag, wrote the date and time across the seal, and called a digital forensics firm used in commercial cases. By noon, an examiner had created a read-only image of the drive, calculated verification hashes, and preserved the original. Each one had to be authenticated. The forged transfer agreement contained embedded metadata showing it had been created on Damian's executive laptop, revised by an outside consultant, and exported to PDF 2 weeks before Sophie found it. The divorce strategy carried track changes from Damian's personal attorney and communications director. Rachel noticed the same phrases repeated in draft press statements: pregnancy-related confusion, increasing paranoia, concerns regarding postpartum stability. Do not respond to those words emotionally, Rachel told Sophie. We are going to respond with their own timeline. The founders' agreement required separate verification. Sophie's paper counterpart was powerful, but Rachel wanted a source Damian could not accuse her of controlling. She subpoenaed the lender's successor bank and requested the original loan file. 48 hours later, the bank produced a certified copy bearing the same signatures, notarization, and exhibit number. Its records contained no replacement, cancellation, or amendment. The agreement did not make Sophie the automatic owner of the entire company. It gave her a defined ownership interest once the valuation threshold was crossed and required disclosure of that interest in major financing and affiliated party transactions. The threshold had been crossed 5 years earlier. Damian had continued raising capital while omitting her stake. A forensic document examiner compared Sophie's genuine signatures from the loan package, tax returns, and prenatal consent forms with the signature on the surrender agreement. The conclusion was careful rather than dramatic. Significant evidence indicated simulation, and the questioned signature was inconsistent with Sophie's natural writing habits. The electronic trail pointed to Damian's device. Rachel also reviewed Sophie's medical records with her consent. They showed elevated blood pressure, fatigue, and prenatal care. They contained no psychiatric diagnosis and no finding that Sophie lacked decision-making capacity. Rachel refused to claim the records proved perfect mental health. They proved only that Damian's public story was unsupported and had been drafted months earlier. That distinction mattered. Sophie filed the petition for dissolution of marriage in Cook County. Rachel requested temporary relief to prevent dissipation of marital property and to preserve disputed records. Separately, she notified Lancaster Development's General Counsel and Audit Committee of the apparent forgery, undisclosed ownership interest, and transfers to Brielle's company. The board, not Sophie, retained an independent forensic accountant. For 2 days, Sophie moved between legal appointments and prenatal monitoring. Dr. Porter warned that her blood pressure remained high and made her promise to call at the first sign of headache, blurred vision, or reduced fetal movement. Rachel arranged a private apartment, secure transportation, and a direct line for all communication with Damian. Damian sent 11 messages the first night. Please come home. You are embarrassing yourself. Think about the baby. Your lawyer is using you. I can forgive this. The final message arrived at 2:06 a.m. You have no idea what I can take from you. Sophie forwarded every message to Rachel and turned off the phone. The next morning, the court granted narrow temporary preservation relief based on the authenticated documents and the risk that records or property could be moved. It did not declare Damian guilty. It ordered both sides to preserve evidence and prohibited extraordinary transfers involving the disputed assets until a fuller hearing. That same morning, Rachel prepared 2 cream envelopes. One would end the marriage. The other would force the company to remember who helped create it. The second envelope reached Lancaster Development's boardroom 12 minutes after the first landed on Damian's desk. No champagne waited there. Only black coffee, polished walnut, and 7 directors watching the company's general counsel break a cream seal with a silver letter opener. The first page was not a divorce petition. It was formal notice of the authenticated evidence and a demand that the audit committee conduct an independent financial investigation. The second contained copies of transfers routed through shell companies. The third showed Sophie's forged signature. By the fifth page, nobody was drinking coffee anymore. Across the hall, Damian paced inside his office with his phone pressed against his ear. "Sophie, answer me." "Voicemail." He called again. Then Rachel Monroe answered. "Mr. Lancaster, put my wife on the phone. She is not required to speak with you directly." Damian's jaw tightened. "This is a family matter." Rachel looked across her desk at Sophie, who sat quietly in a navy maternity dress, both hands folded over her daughter. "No," Rachel said. "It became a legal matter when someone forged her name." Silence followed. "Not guilt. Calculation." Damian lowered his voice. "I can make this easier for everyone." An hour later, his attorneys delivered an offer. $5 million. A private residence. Lifetime medical coverage for Sophie and the baby. In exchange, she would withdraw the emergency motions, surrender all claims to Lancaster Development, and sign a permanent confidentiality agreement. Rachel read the proposal once, then slid it across the table. "He thinks this is generous." Sophie studied the number. There had been a time when $5 million would have sounded like freedom. Now it looked like a price tag tied around her silence. What happens to the investigation? It disappears. And the forged document? He admits nothing. It remains disputed privately. And the story about me being unstable? Rachel's expression hardened. "He keeps it ready in case you ever speak." Sophie pushed the offer back. "No." Rachel did not smile, but pride warmed her eyes. "Are you certain?" Sophie felt her daughter move beneath her ribs. "He is not buying my future with money he stole from my past." At Lancaster Development, Damian received her refusal during an emergency meeting with his legal team. He stared at the message for a long moment. Then something cold settled over his face. "If she wants a war," he said, "give the public a reason not to trust her." Brielle stood near the conference table, pale now, her confidence thinning beneath the fluorescent lights. "Damian, the board has the transfer records. They have allegations. They have my company name." He turned toward her. "Then remember who paid for everything you have." By sunset, a statement appeared on 3 business news sites. Sources close to Damian Lancaster expressed concern over his pregnant wife's deteriorating emotional condition. The statement described Sophie as confused, paranoid, and vulnerable to manipulation by an aggressive attorney. It mentioned Damian's devotion, his concern, his hope that she would seek treatment. The cruelty wore the language of compassion. Sophie read the article from Rachel's office while rain moved down the windows in silver lines. Her photograph appeared beneath the headline. It had been taken outside the prenatal clinic. Her face looked tired. One hand covered her belly. The caption called her distressed. Rachel reached for the phone. "We can respond tonight." Sophie shook her head. "No, they are defining you before the hearing. Let them." Rachel studied her carefully. Sophie closed the article and opened the evidence timeline. Damian had made one mistake. His public statement repeated phrases found inside the divorce strategy drafted 3 months earlier. The same words, the same order, the same lie. Sophie looked toward the dark Chicago skyline. He just proved this was planned. And somewhere inside Lancaster Development, Damian was still celebrating control, unaware that every sentence he released had become another page in her case. By morning, Damian's lie had crossed the city faster than the rain. Business channels repeated it. Online commentators dissected Sophie's face. Anonymous sources called her fragile, confused, and dangerously emotional. One photograph followed every headline. Sophie outside the prenatal clinic, pale beneath the winter light, one hand pressed to her belly, as if she were struggling to remain standing. Nobody published the moment before it. Nobody showed the blood pressure warning. Nobody mentioned that Damian had missed the appointment. A tired woman had been turned into evidence against herself. Stay with me, because the most dangerous stories are not always invented from nothing. Sometimes they are built by cutting the truth until only the weapon remains. Damian arrived at the emergency hearing through the courthouse's private entrance. Navy suit, silver tie, concern carefully arranged across his face. Brielle followed several steps behind him, dressed in black, avoiding the cameras she once knew how to control. Sophie entered through the main doors. No sunglasses, no security wall, no attempt to hide. Her honey blonde hair was tied low at the back of her neck. She wore a simple dark blue maternity dress and carried no designer handbag, only a slim leather folder. The crowd outside grew quiet. They had expected a woman unraveling. Instead, they saw one moving slowly because she carried a child, not because she lacked strength. Damian approached her in the corridor before Rachel could intervene. "Sophie," he said softly, loud enough for nearby reporters to hear. "Please let me help you." She looked at him. For years, that voice had made her question her own memory. Now it sounded rehearsed. "You had 3 months to help me," she replied. "You used them to write this story." The courtroom doors opened with a low wooden groan. Inside, Rachel began with dates. Not emotion, not accusations. Dates. She placed Damian's internal divorce strategy beside his public statement. The judge read both documents in silence. Pregnancy-related confusion, increasing paranoia, emotional instability. The phrases appeared in the same sequence, the same punctuation, the same lie prepared 91 days before Sophie filed anything. "This was not a concerned husband reacting to a crisis," Rachel said. "This was a campaign waiting for permission to begin." Damian's attorney objected. The judge overruled him. Rachel submitted Sophie's medical records with her consent. They showed ordinary informed decision-making during prenatal care, elevated blood pressure, and no psychiatric diagnosis supporting Damian's claims. Rachel did not ask the judge to declare Sophie mentally flawless. She asked why Damian's accusation had been written 91 days before any alleged crisis. Then came the calendar. For missed prenatal visits. 6 unexplained overnight absences. 9 transfers initiated while Damian claimed to be caring for his wife. The image of the devoted husband cracked quietly. Brielle shifted in her seat. Rachel displayed the certified bank copy of the founder's agreement, the document examiner's report, and the corporate invoices next. A penthouse lease, luxury travel, jewelry, all categorized as client development expenses. Brielle's face lost its color. Damian had told her the apartment was his. It belonged to a company account. He had told her the jewelry was a gift. The board had paid for it. During a recess, Brielle stood alone inside a marble restroom, staring at her reflection beneath unforgiving white lights. Her phone contained 4 years of messages, promises, instructions, threats disguised as affection. One message now felt different. "Keep Sophie calm until the papers are signed. After that, I'll handle you too. Handle you. Not marry you. Not protect you. Handle you." Brielle's manicured fingers began to tremble. She opened a new message to Rachel Monroe. For several seconds, she could not type. Then she wrote 6 words. "I kept every message he sent." Across the corridor, Rachel's phone vibrated. She read the sentence once, then looked towards Sophie. Inside the courtroom, Damian was still smiling for the cameras. He had no idea the woman beside him had just stepped out of his story. The boardroom doors closed at 10:03 a.m. Glass walls. Black leather chairs. Chicago suspended 40 floors below like a city waiting for a verdict. Damian Lancaster entered with 3 attorneys and the confidence of a man who still believed every room belonged to him. Sophie was already seated at the opposite end of the table. Her honey blonde hair fell softly over one shoulder. One hand rested on the folder before her. The other covered the gentle curve of her unborn daughter. No tears, no anger, only stillness. And stillness, Damian had learned too late, was not the same as weakness. "Let us end this performance," he said, taking his seat. "My wife is being manipulated." Rachel Monroe opened her laptop. "You may want to hear the evidence before choosing that word." The chairman nodded. The first message appeared on the screen. "Keep Sophie calm until after the birth. She signs easier when she is exhausted." Nobody moved. The next message followed. "Start documenting her emotional episodes. We may need them for custody." Sophie felt her daughter shift beneath her palm. She did not look at Damian. She watched the board members read, one by one, line by line. Every private instruction he had sent Brielle now glowed above his head in cold white letters. Create concern before she creates suspicion. Move the River North property before the petition. Use her old signature if necessary. Damian leaned forward. "These messages have been altered." Brielle stood near the side wall. For the first time since Sophie had known her, she looked small. "They have not," Brielle said. Damian turned slowly. The room seemed to contract around him. "Sit down." "No, one word." "Quiet." "Final." Brielle placed her phone on the table, and slid it toward the general counsel. Every message is there. The originals, the timestamps, the attachments. He told me Sophie was unstable. He told me the transfers were legal. Damian's face hardened. You were involved. Yes, Brielle whispered. And I will answer for it. Then she looked at Sophie. I am sorry. Sophie gave no forgiveness. Not yet. Some wounds deserve truth before mercy. Rachel presented the financial records next. Company funds had paid for Brielle's apartment, vacations, jewelry, and private security. The forged transfer had been created from a scanned document stored on Damian's executive account. Then came the founder's agreement. The original. Sophie's faded signature rested beside Damian's, guaranteeing her ownership interest in Lancaster development once the company crossed its valuation threshold. It had crossed that threshold 5 years earlier, and the lender's certified file showed no superseding agreement. The chairman removed his glasses. Mr. Lancaster, why was this never disclosed? Damian looked at Sophie at last. Not like a husband, like a man staring at the witness who had survived. That agreement was replaced years ago, Damian said. The independent accountant slid the bank certification across the table, then produced the replacement. The lender has none, the corporate minute books have none, and no amendment was disclosed to investors. Damian looked toward his attorneys. Neither spoke. Silence struck the room. Heavy. Absolute. Rachel closed the folder. After counsel confirmed the board's authority under the bylaws, the directors voted 11 minutes later. Damian was suspended immediately pending criminal and financial investigation. His access to corporate accounts was revoked. An independent auditor would review every transfer made during the marriage. Security entered. Damian rose, furious now, the polished mask finally gone. You think you won, he hissed at Sophie. Without me, you have nothing. Sophie stood carefully. The room watched her cross the distance between them. No, she said. Without me, you never had any of this. Security escorted him through the glass doors he once believed would always open for him. Sophie remained behind. Outside, cameras crowded the lobby. Inside, her daughter kicked once beneath her hand. The sound of Damian's empire collapsing was not thunder. It was a door closing softly behind him. 3 months later, the first sound Sophie heard was not applause. It was her daughter's cry cutting through the delivery room, fierce and bright, a tiny declaration that neither fear nor money had been allowed to choose her future. Sophie laughed through tears as the nurse placed the baby against her chest. Hello, Evelyn, she whispered. Outside, snow pressed against the hospital windows. Rachel stood in the hallway holding 2 coffees and a court order. Damian's accounts had been frozen. Federal investigators were reviewing the forged documents, and Lancaster Development had formally restored Sophie's ownership interest. No extraordinary transfer, financing, or affiliated party transaction could proceed without the approvals required by the restored agreement. The story had spread far beyond Chicago. Millions watched the silent footage of Sophie leaving the boardroom while Damian was escorted away. Commentators called it the day a pregnant wife took back her name. Sophie never repeated the phrase. She knew names were not returned by headlines. They were reclaimed in quieter rooms. Damian tried to reach her from his attorney's office. He sent apologies, accusations, and promises. In one message, he said they could still be a family. In another, he blamed Brielle. Sophie listened to neither. She forwarded every message to Rachel and returned to the nursery, where sunlight warmed the unfinished wooden mobile. Brielle entered a cooperation agreement, testified about the transfers, and waited for the court to decide how much weight her assistance deserved. She lost her title, the penthouse, and the glamorous future Damian had sold her. When she sent Sophie a handwritten apology, Sophie placed it inside a drawer. Forgiveness was not a performance ode to the person who finally told the truth. 6 weeks after Evelyn's birth, Sophie entered Lancaster Development through the front doors. The lobby fell silent. Employees who once knew her only as Damian's wife now watched the founder, whose calculations had built their first fortune, cross the marble floor with a sleeping baby against her shoulder. The board offered her the chief executive position. Sophie declined. She chose instead to become executive chair, appoint an independent chief executive, and create protections for employees reporting financial or domestic abuse. She did not rebuild the company in Damian's image. She removed the need for anyone to survive another man like him. That afternoon, Sophie carried Evelyn into the old records room. Rachel followed with the restored founder's agreement in a protective case. The faded paper looked almost ordinary beneath the fluorescent lights. No diamonds, no cameras, only two signatures and the truth one of them had tried to bury. Sophie added a new page to the company archive. It listed every person who had helped build the first acquisition, from the junior accountant to the night custodian who kept the office open. At the bottom, she wrote her own name without a title beside it. None was needed. Evelyn stirred and opened her blue-gray eyes. Sophie touched one finger to her daughter's palm, and the tiny hand closed around it with surprising strength. Beyond the glass, Chicago moved beneath a pale winter sun. Somewhere, elevators opened and closed, carrying powerful men toward rooms they believed they controlled. Sophie no longer needed to watch those doors. She had walked through the only one that mattered. Some fortunes disappear in court. Others vanish the moment a woman stops mistaking possession for love.